Daniel, how are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I saw you on Fox News the other night. You're out making the rounds again. You look good, but am I not right? Your dad would be totally obsessed by the Nationals at this point.
Yeah, no, he'd be happy as a little kid right now. I actually kept his season tickets at Nats Park, and I've been going to all the playoff games, and each time I'm so happy for the team, but for him, and I've gotten can't tell you how many messages from his friends and admirers, knowing how happy he would be about it.
Now, I've got opened in on your book, which I keep on my shelf in my studio. Whenever I show up on MSNBC, you see the point of it all behind me. Chapter 3 contest, suffering a relapse and loving it. It's my favorite essay in the book because it's about, well, he said the whole thing is completely irrational. I'm an irrational Indians and Browns fans. Absolutely irrational, especially given the way the Browns have played for the last 20 years. What was his approach to a baseball game? We did a long interview about the point of it all. If people do not have not read it, you've missed a great collection of essays. Go out and get it. But I want to kind of explore, since it is World Series night, how he would go about going to a Nationals game, where your tickets are, how he enjoyed the game. Everyone's got their own rituals.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you mentioned, that piece in the book is one of my favorites too, and I think it goes to the heart of just his passion for the game. And like you said, it was totally irrational for a very rational guy, but he really embraced that part of himself and life too. That you have to love the things that you love for their own sake, and I think that was the key to baseball for him. That it just had this kind of beauty to it. Just as he writes in the book, kind of doing something with human excellence. He just loved, and it was those moments of a perfect double play, or just that ecstatic catch in left field, some moment that really tested the limits of what people can do. And he would go to almost every home game. He had season tickets, and he'd drive over from Brett's show on Fox. He talks about in the book he had it timed down to a quick 12-minute drive. He knew the exact route, and his tickets were along the first base line, and he had picked them out when they were building the stadium. And I would go with him whenever I was home. And yeah, I mean, he just knew every detail inside and out. He knew every random, completely arbitrary stat on every player. He knew their backstories. He knew their mother's maiden name. I mean, he got really into it when he fully committed, as he wrote in that piece.
I want people to understand he was a baseball fan once, and then it just stopped after a game that I also watched, and I watched it in Boston in 1975, the greatest baseball game ever played between the Reds and the Red Sox. He just stopped. But then the Nationals came to town, and here are 5 paragraphs. The Washington Nationals are born. I do not know a thing about them. I do not know a single player on the team. I have no residual allegiance to them, even though I grew up in Montreal and remember well their opening 1969 season at the absurdly chintzy Jarry Park because I never cared about the Expo. But this is a new home team, and I'm a bit curious. So I'm listening to their second game, a come from behind win in which a no name center fielder, Brad Wilkerson, hits for the cycle. Next day, a nifty comeback. Jose Vidro hits a game winning homer in the 10th. I'm beginning to ask the Butch Cassidy question: who are those guys? Then another comeback, another game winning dinger, this time by Jose Guillen, a refugee from Anaheim Angels, shipped out after, let us say, an altercation with his manager. And then yet another surprise victory against the fearsome Atlanta Braves, a ridiculously impossible comeback with 2 outs in the ninth. Presto, it is 1975 all over again. I begin to care. I want them to win. Why? I have no idea. I begin following day games on the internet. I've punched not one but 2 preset national stations onto my car radio. I'm aghast. I'm actually invested in the day-to-day fortunes of 25 lunkheads I've never heard of until 2 weeks ago. This is crazy. I've relapsed, and I like it so much I've forsworn all medication. Go Nats. That's a genuine fan, Daniel Krauthammer.
Yeah, yeah, no, and like you said, he resisted kind of falling back in love with the game because it had broken his heart when he loved it earlier in his life, and that's why he swore it off for so long. Like some of his other passions, he often referred to it as drinking aftershave. He would just keep
Ha!
bottom of the bottle every time, but as he wrote there, he succumbed and he let himself fall in love with the Nats, and it really was a source of fun and joy and happiness for him for all whole decade that he went to all those games.
I don't recall if you recall, but Dwayne, the producer, would always argue with your dad before he came on the show for a hit. He would be talking with Dwayne baseball about Mike Trout versus the fellow who
Mm,
must not be named because he's been exiled and misses this whole thing. But it was a who was the better all-tool player. Let's
right.
go from the happiest essay in The Point of It All to the saddest one, Iraq Abandoned, on page 219, because there are echoes of this story today
Yeah.
in whether or not I do not believe we are abandoning the Kurds. I believe that we are actually going to pull this off. I think we're going to pull this off. We'll know in about 2 weeks with a 20-mile corridor. But he saw it coming, and that's what I wanted to go to. When he wrote this essay on May 22nd, 2015, he knew that it was the withdrawal in 2011 that brought about the collapse of Iraq, the rise of ISIS, and the reason that Americans are in Syria today and withdrawing. He saw it all.
Yeah, no, it's like you say, the situation today. There are strong echoes. It is different, and I always refrain from guessing what my dad would say about current events. But he did have, as you say, very strong views on this, and particularly on Iraq, and in general, where he supported a strong American foreign policy and one that followed through when it committed, and he was very realistic about how the world works, and he knew that a vacuum brings in other powers, and if that America doesn't take an active role in shaping world events, then other powers who have very ill intentions for us, whether it be Iran or Russia or China, are the ones who will shape events instead of us. And he was very circumspect and very careful when he said America should commit itself to conflicts, particularly committing troops. But when we did make those commitments, and particularly when we made announcements to the world, both our enemies and our allies, that we were going to do something and going to follow through, that it was essential to do that, because otherwise our allies are weakened, our enemies emboldened, and it makes the world a more dangerous place, and it makes it more likely that America will have to commit itself in the future.
Now, Daniel Krauthammer, one of the very last essays in the book, it's not physically the last in the essay, it's on page 250, but I wanted to read from it. Trump Derangement Syndrome. You can't govern by id. This is in 2017, your father wrote, having coined Bush derangement syndrome more than a decade ago, I feel authorized to weigh in on its most recent offshoot. What distinguishes Trump derangement syndrome is not just general hysteria about the subject, but additionally the inability to distinguish between legitimate policy differences on the one hand and signs of psychic pathology on the other. He ended it by saying Trump was elected to do politically incorrect and needed things like withdrawing from Paris. He was not elected to do crazy things, starting with his tweets. If he cannot distinguish between the two, Trump's derangement system will only become epidemic. And in fact, it has, because
Yeah.
the president didn't. That was a prophecy that came true. Agree?
I think so, and I think that section you read matches a lot of what my dad wrote, both in the book and in his other columns about the president. And I think he charted a path that very few have been able to chart, which is to separate out those things, to support a lot of the actual policies that the president has enacted and ones that my father agreed with, disagreeing with those that he didn't agree with, but to be able to separate that from the emotions that the president is so good at stirring up across the board. And I think my father had a particular skill for that, of not getting caught up in the drama, in the emotional heightening of it all, and really seeing through to what mattered, what the stakes were. And he criticized the president a lot. He supported him on some things, and I think that kind of clear-sightedness allowed him to chart that path in a way that many others have found it harder to do, and have ended up being kind of more on the president's team or against him.
Well, this is, I try and live in that space where you're able to criticize the president but also applaud him, because the tectonic plates are moving against each other in America, and it's a binary choice so often at the end of the day. And if you clear away the noise of Nancy Pelosi accusing the president of all roads run to Putin, and you clear away the noise of the president of calling her a third-rate politician, if you clear that all away, there are fundamental differences afoot here, Daniel, that your father was very good at seeing, recognizing, and reminding people this isn't about a tweet. It isn't about a particular bill, there's a fundamental divide in the country that cannot be bridged. I mean, we don't have to yell at each other over it, but we do have to have elections over to see which way we're going to go.
Yeah, he was. He often would say elections have consequences, and that goes both ways. But he also thought it was important to debate the real stakes of the elections, and I think, as we were saying, it often gets covered over by kind of the reality show aspect of politics these days. And he had a very good way of cutting through the chaff and saying, all right, this is the core debate that we're actually having here. And I think that's one of the reasons people on both sides of the aisle, even if they disagreed with him, actually really appreciated him, because he could identify what the core stakes were, what the actual root issue at hand was, beyond the heightened emotions and the drama of it all.
Last question, Daniel. One of the things I observed your father doing that I have tried to emulate when I do meet the press every few weeks is he always would prepare and have in his mind, I thought, a key message he wanted to deliver within the 1 minute allocated typically to a guest panelist, whether it's on Special Report or Meet the Press, whatever. Did he ever discuss with you the preparation for that? Because you have to be both nimble. You have to answer the question presented by the host, but you also have a point that you want to make.
Yeah, he didn't talk super specifically with me about TV in particular, but he would often talk to me about just how he put his thoughts together, both in writing and speaking, speeches and television. And the memory that always sticks with me is from when I was a kid. He would tell me, this is kind of back when I was 10 years old, I think. He said, I often say to myself when things are getting too complicated or overwrought, I say, how would I say this simply and straightforwardly to Daniel? My who's smart enough to understand, but he may not know all these details yet. And I think he always kept that in mind of, if you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it well enough yourself. And
in my law school class, if you can't tell it to a junior high school student, you have not made your point. Daniel Krauthammer, congratulations on the paperback edition of The Point of It All. I hope it sells and sells and sells. If people missed it the first time around, they should go and get it today. Have a great World Series, Daniel. I know you'll be pulling for the Nats.
I will, Hugh. Thank you.